Welcome to the Market Failures set of podcasts. There are 5 podcasts all devoted to market failures. The previous podcast was on the topic of providing safety nets to protect against market failures. This podcast is the 3rd in the series and covers the topic of providing regulations as a way to correct market failures. The next podcast in the series, the 4th out of 5, discusses providing public goods and services. The last podcast discusses stabilizing the economy. Let's begin to talk about regulations as a way the government combats problems that arise in the market. In general, regulations are basically sets of rules that people and organizations must abide by. Regulations exist in both the private and public sector. This podcast focuses on the public sector, or government regulations. The government has set thousands upon thousands of regulations in many areas in order to try to address the problems that would occur if there was no government involvement in the market. While many people argue there are too many regulations that limit the ability of private businesses to function as efficiently as possible, few would argue against getting rid of all regulations. This is because of human economic behavior. Businesses most often exist in order to make money. Profit motive means that people will invest more into growth and innovation, and it's essential to a functioning market economy. However, businesses don't have a financial incentive to fix certain problems because fixing certain problems will cause them to lose money. If a business recognizes that by fixing a certain problem, it will actually help it financially, it will do it. Otherwise, it won't. Therein lies the need for regulations. Since individuals and businesses are driven by self-interest, they tend not to deal with things that affect third parties, others not involved in the original decision, in other words. They create negative externalities. Negative externalities is another term for external costs. We know that the decisions individuals and businesses make are constantly affecting others around them. Sometimes these negative effects can be small, but other times they have the potential to be deadly. It's up to the government to set regulations and rules that govern what actions individuals and businesses can or cannot take in order to protect against these negative consequences. Regulations can directly prohibit, meaning not allow, certain actions. Regulations can also take the form of incentives that cause individuals and businesses to change their behavior and make decisions that are in the best interest of society as a whole. Referencing the above quote, instead of third parties experiencing external costs, regulations are put in place so that the producers themselves, whether individuals or businesses, incur, meaning are responsible for, the costs or negative effects if they don't follow the rules. Let's discuss some examples of external costs, aka negative externalities that can occur. Examples such as pollution, garbage, noise, and traffic are just a few examples out of many. These examples are pretty common ones, but there are others that are not as obvious. For example, casinos can be a great source of tax revenue or income. However, this increases not only the chance of gambling addiction for those who visit them, but often also leads to an increase in crime in surrounding areas. These are problems society needs to deal with. Another great example of a less obvious problem that imposes many external costs is the obesity epidemic. There are external costs imposed on the public when people are unhealthy. Businesses have a financial incentive to make yummier and yummier tasting foods and new delicious drinks. Low-calorie, healthy foods might not taste as good or be as profitable. However, fatty, sugary, and processed foods cause people to pack on the pounds and may also be linked to other health problems. This, for example, puts a large burden on the entire healthcare system because more people end up being treated for avoidable diseases. In order to accommodate for so many people using healthcare resources, health insurance companies raise the price of health insurance for everyone, even those who are fit and healthy. Another, more current example of a negative externality that many people have heard about are the potentially negative effects that come from drilling for natural gas using fracking. Not only might some of the chemicals used by the fracking industry be hazardous to public health, but there is an established correlation between fracking sites and a rise in earthquakes affecting those areas. While there is some debate over how bad the negative externalities from fracking really are, A major source of debate is whether the benefits of fracking for natural gas outweigh the external costs that occur. In other words, there will always be negative externalities caused by the market, but decisions must be made on how much should be done to stop these costs from occurring. This is why regulatory agencies exist. Along with the other government groups and policies, these agencies try to minimize negative externalities experienced by the public. There are hundreds of regulatory agencies. There is no one exact number because it depends on what can be considered an agency. They not only vary in size, but some operate more independently of the executive branch departments than others. Many also have broader roles than just simply issuing and implementing regulations. We will briefly look at the 6 agencies listed: the Food and Drug Administration, the Environmental Protection Agency, the Consumer Product Safety Commission, the Nuclear Regulatory Commission, the Federal Trade Commission, and the Securities and Exchange Commission. These examples provide a glimpse into how agencies play a role in regulating actions and correcting negative externalities. First is the FDA. The FDA is responsible for making sure that the food and drug manufacturers comply with certain safety regulations. The FDA was actually created in the beginning of the 20th century as the public started to learn about all the disgusting and potentially harmful things that could be found in many foods. The FDA regulates food and drugs in many ways. For example, it requires packaged foods to include nutritional information on the packaging. The FDA also inspects foods such as meat and vegetables and issues guidelines on what can and cannot be sold to the public. When there are outbreaks of foodborne sickness, the FDA will try to figure out where the bad food came from and decide on the course of action to take in order to contain the problem. Without food being regulated, food companies might act recklessly. Disturbing ingredients, more disturbing than those already allowed, might end up in the food we eat. Other problems could also occur. The FDA regulates drugs as well. This protects the public from companies selling drugs that don't work or are too strong. The idea is that if a drug is approved by the FDA, the public can then be assured that it has been fully studied and the benefits and side effects are well known. Not all nutritional supplements, such as vitamins or homeopathic medicine, have been evaluated. This means there are still potentially hazardous things people can take. However, those too must be labeled, indicating lack of evaluation. All in all, the FDA is a hugely important regulatory agency because it has such broad control over what people put into their bodies. Companies simply don't always have enough incentive to give the public all the information if it means a loss of money. Another important agency is the Environmental Protection Agency. Created under President Nixon, it is tasked with protecting the environment. What it means to protect the environment can differ from one presidential administration to another, depending on what types of resources are valued and positions are taken on the impact of climate change. Regardless, the EPA plays a major role in making sure that the public isn't exposed to toxic chemicals and pollutants at high levels. Cleaning up the environment is expensive, and because cleaning up messes doesn't often result in financial profit, the government must sometimes step in to force companies to act and follow environmental regulations. It's not only private businesses who pollute, however. The federal government created plenty of polluted sites before there was a large understanding of how certain materials, such as radioactive waste, would affect the environment. The EPA now helps to clean up those sites so that not only is the government protected, but so is the individual. An example of this is Rocky Flats, located along the foothills between Boulder and Golden, Colorado. This site, a former government nuclear weapons production facility, became the most polluted site in the nation after years of operation. The EPA took on the responsibility for cleaning the land so that the surrounding areas were safe. This was because there was no incentive for a private business to clean the land since it was too expensive. However, the EPA cleaned up Rocky Flats and the land is now a wildlife refuge. The surrounding areas also have recently been privately developed. These areas could only first be developed once the EPA determined that the levels of radioactive materials fell within normal limits and wouldn't be hazardous to public health. Next is the Consumer Product Safety Commission. It protects the public from injury stemming from products that were found to be potentially harmful. It is often expensive to make products that are completely safe. Businesses may have a financial interest in cutting corners, meaning ignoring public health and safety. The Consumer Product Safety Commission is tasked with making sure that businesses do indeed pay attention to health and safety matters and create products that are within the safety guidelines it has created. For example, small beads might look fun for kids to play with, but warning labels are required for products because they might create a choking hazard for younger children. The Consumer Product Safety Commission is also responsible for issuing recalls. Recalls occur when it is found that a certain product can cause health hazards. The Commission requires companies to publicly post recalls and try to contact customers as well as to offer refunds or fixes for defective products. Prior to the Commission's founding, instructions were not even always available for how to safely use products. Moving on, the Nuclear Regulatory Commission helps to regulate safety when it comes to nuclear energy. It's not anywhere near as large as the three previous examples, nor does it have such broad powers, but it is nonetheless an important example of how the government is protecting individuals. For example, the Nuclear Regulatory Commission issues permits for power plants and makes sure that the companies are regularly performing safety checks. This is especially important when it comes to nuclear energy. Nuclear energy is one way of getting so-called clean energy because the actual energy it produces is quite clean. However, nuclear energy uses radioactive elements in order to produce its energy. This means that there is a lot of used radioactive material left over from the process. This waste needs to be handled very carefully and stored somewhere. Since there is no current permanent solution for where to store all the waste, most of it is stored at the power plant site itself. These storage methods are meant to prevent a health and safety crisis. Without tight regulation, companies might try to find a cheaper solution for how to store the nuclear waste that could threaten the public. The Federal Trade Commission is not concerned with the type of physical safety that previous examples have been concerned with. Instead, it protects the public from unfair business practices. What is in a private business's best interests can sometimes have a negative impact on the individual consumer. Without regulation of the market, businesses could take advantage of their power and eliminate competition in the market. Given that a market needs competition in order to maintain a balance between buyers and sellers, aka consumers and producers, this is important. Otherwise, prices might become too high, leading to other economic problems. It is therefore sometimes up to the government to decide whether or not a certain industry is trying to do something that will reduce competition too much. For example, 3 of the largest wireless phone companies are Verizon, AT&T, and T-Mobile. Even though T-Mobile and Sprint are now merging, when AT&T and T-Mobile announced their decision to merge into one company, the FTC put a stop to it. It was concerned that with fewer wireless carriers, prices would get too high. The government also stepped in when Staples and Office Depot tried to merge. While the FTC had earlier let Office Depot and Office Max merge, it decided that if Staples merged, there wouldn't be enough competition in the office supply products market if those 2 companies did combine. While we don't know how bad the effects of these mergers would have been on the public had they been allowed to occur, the general need to stop one company from controlling an entire industry and getting rid of competition is real. Lastly, the Securities and Exchange Commission is responsible for protecting individuals from the risky tactics practiced by the financial industry. While there is considerable debate over the number of business regulations and how strict these regulations should be, there needs to be regulation of large corporations because many people invest in these businesses with their savings, and they also use the money they make in the market for retirement. Because the financial business is really competitive and business growth is so important, companies sometimes have incentives to make reckless financial investments and even break the law in the name of making a profit. For example, the SEC protects people against the unfair practice of insider trading. Insider trading is the practice of buying and selling shares of stock for one's own advantage despite having access to confidential information or information not yet known to the public. This is considered cheating and is illegal because it allows someone with inside access to make money through causing others to lose money. When regulations are too weak, there is not enough oversight, and people might get away with cheating the system in other ways as well, all for personal gain. Hopefully, these regulatory examples have demonstrated the potential benefits of at least a minimum level of regulation. So, to summarize, because individuals and businesses are motivated by maintaining a profit and by self-interest, the actions they can sometimes take may negatively affect the public. Through regulating food, drugs, the environment, waste, consumer products, the financial industry, and many other things people are guaranteed some level of protection against, the market forces that produce potentially harmful side effects are definitely lessened. Continue to the fourth podcast in the series to learn about government-provided goods and services that help to protect against market failures.